Hi, this is Curt, and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Roundup.
But in Dallas, we have a woman who was injured by a hose that was coming off and I want to be clear, a 2008 fire. I think it's an engine, but you can't really tell. It says it's a 2008 Red Spartan Motors fire truck. So I'm not really sure what it is. And before I go further and talk about this, Curt, do you know whether is this an engine, a truck, a pickup? Do we know what this is?
I'm assuming it's an engine. Okay, and I've got some assumptions, but you go ahead and
okay.
Give us the details, and I'll give you my perspective on it.
Look, as y'all can imagine, so what happened is the hose came off the back. It struck 5 or 6 parked cars as they're driving and taking lefts and rights. It's flying around off the back, and then the plaintiff, a female who was walking to her car, it struck her. After striking a mailbox. I mean, this thing is flailing and hitting everything, but it hurt her. It hit and injured her. And what's interesting is what the lawsuit alleges, because I'm going to give you my 2 cents on this, which may or may not offend some people, but here I go. So they sue based on the employee who was acting in the scope of their duties, and then they said, but the employee could be individually liable, trying to make the fire department or city vicariously liable. But here's the thing: let me go back, because if I'm writing the suit, I'm doing it very differently. NFPA may or may not be law. I presume it's not in Dallas, right, in Texas. But NFPA 1901 was amended in 2005 or came out in 2005. And what's funny is I did a lecture back in 2016 to the National Health and Safety Officers Conference out in Arizona. And we talked about fire truck safety. And one of the topics I lectured on is there are no freak accidents. So I went back to my lecture given years ago, and look, in 2006, 1901 added hose storage requirements. They needed to be covered. We all know they needed to be covered, right? And then I quote all these freak accidents. In 2010, a woman struck by a flailing fire hose died. Right. In 2017, man dies after what they call freak fire accident, right, with a freak hose accident. In Toledo in 2016, Toledo was sued for wrongful death of a man struck by a hose. In 2014, another one. 12 vehicles damaged, right, in 2013 by a hose. A Georgia firefighter dies after being struck by a fire hose in 2017. So here's my question. How does this still happen? We know better. And just because you haven't bought the vehicle, so it's an older vehicle that came out, was bought 2 years after the standard, but it was 2 years after the standard. And this is not like we're going to redo the seating or we're going to redo anything on the vehicle other than putting a guard on there. So I'm kind of curious, was there webbing on there? Was there a guard? How do we not do that with all of these? And that was just a smattering of the freak accidents that keep happening. That's where I would be targeting this. It was a known risk of danger. You ignore it in the industry, a known risk of danger, and I'm assuming it wasn't covered. For all I know, it came off, it fell down. I don't have those facts.
Well, let me just give you my perspective. I think that's good, and I think what you showed people is the way that a firefighter attorney is going to approach it. Someone who knows what an NFPA standard is, knows the relevance of it. The NFPA is certainly going to be evidence of the standard of care. It's not the standard of care; it's evidence of the standard of care. There's other things. There's experts that are going to come in. There's other things that can, be brought into play, but it is evidence of the standard of care. So if NFPA says you should have the hose bed covered, it should be covered. One of the things I was looking at was whether or not the hose came off the back or the side. I think you made an assumption it came off the back. When I was with the NFPA, we had a couple of incidents in Massachusetts that I got involved in where hose came off the apparatus, and it was not off the back. It was out of the Mattydale, so the crosslays. And I also became aware of a lot, we've been facing understaffing for a long time. And just like other problems, equipment manufacturers are looking for ways to leverage their marketing to improve their bottom line. And one of the things that hose manufacturers looked at was making hose more slippery. Okay. In other words, hose that would be easier to deploy, hose that's less likely to get caught up on things. It's going to slide faster so that if you have an understaffed crew, it could be deployed faster. So that was a strategy, some hose manufacturers. And you think about hose today and hose 30, 40 years ago when I started, 50 years ago when I started,
hose, right?
There's more synthetics in it, and it slides a little bit faster and so on. Well, apparently in the late 90s to early 2000s, they started seeing a lot of this. Not a lot, but I mean, I've got at least a couple of dozen examples of it. And because of the two that happened in Massachusetts, I ended up going on the the near miss website. And there were hundreds, not hundreds, dozens of examples in the near miss. And here's what was happening. They're coming out of the Mattydales. Truck goes around a corner, they come out of the Mattydale, and it has a nozzle on it. The nozzle gets stuck under a wheel of a truck. Okay. And then it like slingshots and hits people, hits cars, and people in the near miss database are saying somebody needs to do something. This was incredible. It's incredible no one was killed. It's incredible no one was hurt. This is all in the near miss database, examples of this. Okay. So again, I don't believe it's definitely not an isolated situation. It is what led the NFPA to require covering, if not some sort of positive restraint device on the hose. Here's the other part of this, and I don't want to give away a client confidence on this, okay? But I did have a discussion with a chief who was the fire chief of a department with a number of engine companies. Some of them after the NFPA had required the restraint device. And one of the things when he became the chief, his firefighters came to him and said, "Chief, this is a pain in the neck. We're a busy fire department. We got to take them off." And he allowed them to take the restraint devices off, okay? And his department had a fatality. They had a hose that came off. It got stuck under the wheel of a UPS truck, of all things, right? It slingshotted and hit a woman who was in a crosswalk, but she had stopped for the truck to go by. The truck was going on a run. Slingshot it, hit her, and killed her. Okay. Fortunately for him, that was one of the trucks that did not have the devices on it originally.
So fortunately,
and the conversation went something like this. You understand that you could be facing manslaughter charges right now. Okay. And not that you're going to be convicted. Who knows? Once you go to court, you don't know. But you could potentially be facing manslaughter charges for that. This is a big deal. Okay. And firefighters, and the chiefs have got to understand it. Is a pain in the butt, you better believe it's a pain in the butt. Okay. A lot of things we do, you got to put your air pack on before you go in a building. It's a pain in the butt. All right. But guess what? It's something that we got to live with. So that's my take on it.
After I gave the lecture I referred to a couple of years ago, I went back to my own department where I was the chief at the time and said, talk about, throwing stones at glass houses. I said, I don't even have ours covered. So we ordered everything. The people complained like, oh, it takes so long to unstrap it. And then one of our guys, shout out to a guy, Norm Carroll, but one of our guys came up with this way that if you just pull a strap, it'll unlock the two sides. Right. So it's okay, fine. It was only one very easy step, pull strap, and the webbing will drop down. All right. And it took a half a second. It's not a big deal. And it works. So we need to be doing that, and we need to be adding it. And I will say this, I think juries do not understand ignorance to things that are in the paper all over the place. Right. So for example, if we would be defending, but if we put a fire chief on the stand and said, Chief, are you aware of these 50,000 things, 50 things, 200 fatalities, injuries around the nation? Are you aware of the 1901 standard? And did you deliberately disregard that standard, right? Or did you deliberately disregard the danger? How could you not do it? This isn't some minor, almost never happens. Every year this is happening. And you looked at the near misses. I just reported on the serious injuries and fatalities. You're right, there are too many of these to ignore. And I guarantee there is a new fire truck sitting in somebody's station with the webbing on it. And God forbid, as you say, if they removed it, right? And then there's maybe an older fire truck sitting next to it without the webbing. One of these things doesn't look like the other. So fix it. But this is where lawyers will fix the problem for you. But more than that,
unfortunately, it should never get to that point where lawyers have to fix this problem. Okay,
but just so you know that. Can you imagine killing? One of them was a 4-year-old girl who died. Can you imagine?
I know, tragic. And that was well publicized, you would think. But I think folks think that it's an unusual occurrence. And obviously these things are happening. I mean, not every day, but they're happening enough that we've got to be concerned with it. And that's one of the reasons why we have NFPA standards. By the way, that chief did go back and retrofitted all of their old trucks as well as reinstalled it on the new trucks. But that he is thanking his lucky stars that it wasn't one of his new trucks that they had removed it. And he thought had recently been made the chief, and he was going to try to, meet with the union. What are the beefs, and this was one of the beefs that the guys had. So he said, all right, you know what? We'll allow that.
Well, and look, that's a dichotomy of why, if you've never been the fire chief, don't judge the fire chief until you've done it, right? The fire chief looks at the public, looks at life and safety, looks at legal issues, administrative issues. The firefighters look at one thing: how can I put the fire out best? I'm not saying that one is right, one is wrong, but the needs of the many. Thank you, Leonard Nimoy. The needs of the many have to outweigh the needs of the few, and we need to put in practices that protect the community before, we do something that saves 2 seconds on a fire.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, but it does raise two interesting last points. One is, if you're not reading, and you're a fire chief or administrator, if you're not reading Firefighters Close Calls to see what the common recurring themes are, if you're not watching, frankly, our presentation, if you're not keeping abreast of the issues, the safety issues and liability issues in the fire service, then maybe you are going to have this problem. For example, it's like if you didn't watch Lairdsville with Alan Baird and the whole NFPA 1403 acquired structure, and you just turned a blind eye to what's happening in the world, maybe you keep fighting and taking these acquired structures, fighting them, prepping them in the same way, or not at all. We're ignoring known risks in the fire service. You can't do that and expect to get away with it in court. I guess that's my point.